The morning sun poured its golden light over the serpentine waters of the Brazos River, where willows bent their branches like mothers, protecting their children. Nayeli walked along the bank with slow, deliberate steps, carrying on her shoulders the weight of 5 years of sterile marriage. Her delicate hands touched her flat belly as she watched other Comanche women washing their children's clothes on the river stones. The sound of children's laughter echoed like daggers in her heart, constantly reminding her of her condition marked by the tribal elders. The crystalline waters reflected her anguished face, revealing eyes that no longer sparkled with the hope of youth. Mato's decision, her husband, had been announced the previous night before the tribal council. He needed an heir to carry his name and traditions, and 5 winters of fruitless attempts had exhausted his patience. Nayeli recalled every word spoken by the man with whom she had shared her tent, every gesture of contempt directed at her supposed failure as a woman. The plains wind carried the scent of wildflowers and dry grass, but for her it brought only the bitter echo of the sentence that condemned her to abandonment. Her tears fell silently into the river, mixing with the waters that would soon carry her far from everything she knew. The preparations for her departure were carried out in respectful but relentless silence. The older women of the tribe packed her few personal belongings in a small leather bag, avoiding her gaze as they performed the ritual of separation. Nayeli touched for the last time the buffalo hide walls of her tent, feeling under her fingers the textures that had been her home. The familiar smell of wood fire and medicinal herbs she used to prepare permeated her nostrils, creating a sensory farewell she would keep forever. When the last object was packed, she knew her life as a wife and full member of the community had come to an end. The path to the chosen place for her abandonment was traveled in solemn procession. Mato rode at the front, followed by the elders who had ratified his decision, while Nayeli walked behind, escorted by women who had once been her friends. The infinite horizon of the Texas plains stretched before them, dotted by small groups of buffalo grazing peacefully under the blue-gray sky. The wind swayed the tall grasses in rhythmic waves, creating a natural symphony that contrasted with the heavy silence of the group. With each step, Nayeli felt she was moving away not only from her tribe, but from her own identity. When they reached the river bend where the waters formed a small inlet protected by rocks, Mato finally stopped and dismounted. The location had been carefully chosen. It offered temporary shelter, access to water, and proximity to trade routes where other tribes would eventually pass. Nayeli watched the man who had once promised to love her deposit her bag of belongings on a flat stone, his movements mechanical and devoid of the tenderness he had once shown. The elders murmured protective prayers, while placing beside her belongings a small reserve of dried meat and edible roots. Without words of farewell or gestures of affection, the committee mounted their horses again and departed, leaving Nayeli alone in the vastness of the plains, with only the constant murmur of the river as company. The first days of isolation passed in a fog of despair and disbelief. Nayeli built a rudimentary shelter among the rocks, using willow branches and her wool blanket to create protection against the night wind that swept across the plains. Her hands, accustomed to delicate work of sewing and food preparation, bled while handling the rough branches and sharp stones. The river provided fresh and abundant water, but loneliness weighed on her shoulders like a lead blanket. During the nights, lying under the starry canopy of the Texas sky, she contemplated the cosmic immensity and questioned the designs that had led her to that situation. The stars seemed to whisper ancestral secrets in a language she could no longer decipher. Hunger began to manifest when her food reserves dangerously diminished. Nayeli knew the edible plants of the plains, but collecting alone was an arduous and often fruitless task. Her attempts to fish in the river using an improvised spear resulted in frustrations that left her even more exhausted. The scorching midday sun burned her unprotected skin, while nights brought a penetrating cold that made her tremble uncontrollably. She observed animal tracks in the mud of the riverbank, recognizing traces of deer, rabbits, and occasionally wolves, but knew her ability to hunt alone was limited. Nature, which had always been her ally when living in community, now showed itself indifferent to her struggle for survival. On the 5th morning of her exile, while collecting edible roots near her shelter, Nayeli spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the horizon. Her heart raced between hope and fear, uncertain whether the visitors would bring salvation or danger. She hid among the rocks, watching through a crevice as a small group of horsemen approached. The silhouette of the riders against the morning sun revealed clothing and ornaments different from those of her tribe, suggesting they were Comanches from another band or even enemies. The sound of the horses' hooves echoed rhythmically against the rocky ground, mixing with the constant murmur of the waters. Nayeli held her breath, aware that her fate would depend entirely on the intentions of those strangers. The group's leader dismounted near the river to allow the horses to drink water, and Nayeli could observe his distinctive features. He was a man of imposing stature, with black braided hair adorned with eagle feathers and turquoise beads. His finely worked leather garments and well-maintained weapons indicated he was a respected warrior. The other group members, 3 young warriors, treated him with evident deference, awaiting his orders before any movement. When he crouched to drink water directly from the river with his hands, Nayeli noticed the gentleness of his gestures and the respectful way he treated the natural elements. Something in his posture conveyed a serenity that contrasted with the brutality she had learned to expect from warriors. One of the horses wandered away from the group and began exploring the vicinity, sniffing the air as if detecting a strange presence. The animal headed directly toward Nayeli's improvised shelter, neighing softly upon recognizing the human scent. The group's leader immediately raised his eyes, his keen senses catching the change in the animal's behavior. Nayeli knew her discovery was inevitable and made the brave decision to reveal herself before being found hiding like a fugitive. She emerged slowly from behind the rocks, keeping her hands visible as a sign of non-aggression, her eyes fixed on the man who now decided her fate. The wind carried between them the scent of wildflowers and moist earth, creating a moment of temporal suspension where 2 souls recognized each other across distance and uncertainty. The meeting of gazes between Nayeli and the unknown warrior created a profound silence that even the river's murmur seemed to respect. He observed her with an intensity that carried no threat, but a genuine curiosity mixed with something she couldn't immediately identify. His dark eyes reflected a wisdom that went beyond his apparent age, and Nayeli felt he could see through her desperate situation to reach the dignified woman she still was inside. The other warriors waited in respectful silence, recognizing that this moment belonged to their leader. The plains wind played with Nayeli's loose hair, revealing the pallor of her skin due to prolonged exposure to sun and the poor nutrition of recent days. Without uttering a word, the warrior approached slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Nayeli remained motionless, allowing him to assess her condition while fighting the impulse to lower her eyes in submission. When he extended his hand and gently touched her wrist, checking her pulse, she understood she was before someone with healing knowledge. The calloused texture of his hands contrasted with the delicacy of his touch, revealing a man accustomed to both war and compassion. He quickly examined the wounds on her hands and the evident dehydration in her cracked lips, his countenance showing genuine concern. The sun rays filtering through the willow leaves created patterns of light and shadow over both of them, as if nature itself blessed that unlikely encounter. The warrior gestured to one of his companions, who immediately brought a leather water skin full of fresh water. Nayeli drank eagerly, feeling the precious liquid descend her parched throat, while the man observed each movement with medical attention. When she finished drinking, he offered her a piece of dried meat seasoned with herbs, food far superior to what she had managed to obtain alone in recent days. The rich and nutritious flavor exploded in her mouth, reminding her how fundamental community support was for survival on the plains. She noticed that the other warriors showed no impatience with the attention their leader devoted to her, suggesting that acts of compassion were valued in their group. The simple gesture of sharing food carried deep meaning in Comanche culture, representing acceptance and protection. While Nayeli ate, the warrior examined her improvised shelter and the few belongings scattered among the rocks. His experienced eyes easily read the story of abandonment, written in the precariousness of her situation, in the fine quality of her clothes contrasting with the rusticity of her refuge. He delicately touched the blanket she had used to cover the shelter, recognizing the weaving pattern characteristic of her tribe of origin. When their eyes met again, Nayeli saw in them a deep understanding that dispensed with verbal explanations. The man had deciphered her story without needing words, a woman from a good family, abandoned for reasons that probably involved fertility issues, struggling alone for survival. The empathy she detected in his gaze was like a balm for her wounded soul, offering the first spark of hope since she had been left in that place. The decision was made without consultations or prolonged deliberations. The warrior stood and made a clear gesture for Nayeli to accompany him, indicating one of the spare horses that followed the group. She hesitated for a moment, not from distrust of his intentions, but from the magnitude of the change that choice would represent. Accepting meant leaving behind the last vestiges of her previous life and completely entrusting her destiny to strangers. When he extended his hand to help her mount, Nayeli saw in his eyes a silent promise of protection and care that transcended tribal barriers. The contact of their hands when she accepted his help generated an electric current that coursed through her entire body, awakening sensations she believed were dead forever. As the group moved away from the river toward the infinite horizon of the plains, Nayeli looked back only once, mentally bidding farewell to the desperate woman she had been and opening her heart to the possibility of rebirth. The journey across the plains proved to be a transformative experience for Nayeli, who gradually discovered the name of her savior, Enapay, which means he faces courageously. During rest stops, she observed how he interacted with his warriors, demonstrating leadership based on mutual respect and shared wisdom. His decisions about routes, camping sites, and food distribution were made with careful consideration for everyone's needs, including her own. The plains sun gradually bronzed her pale skin, while regular feeding and Enapay's medical care restored her physical strength. She noticed how he discreetly observed her recovery, adjusting the journey's pace and offering natural remedies to accelerate her healing. The attention devoted to her began to awaken respectful but curious comments among the other warriors in the group. As they approached Enapay's tribe's main encampment, Nayeli could observe the vastness of the community that extended along a fertile valley. Hundreds of buffalo-hide tents dotted the landscape like terrestrial stars, organized in family circles that respected traditional hierarchies. The sound of mixed voices, children playing, and horses neighing created a symphony of community life that contrasted dramatically with the solitude she had experienced on the riverbanks. Enapay explained to her through gentle gestures and words that she would be introduced as a visitor under his protection, a designation that would guarantee her respect and safety while adapting to the new reality. The aroma of food being prepared and smoke from family fires created a welcoming atmosphere that awakened painful nostalgia in her heart for everything she had lost. She perceived that Enapay observed her emotional reactions with the sensitivity of someone who deeply understood the nuances of human pain. The first night in the encampment was marked by a welcoming ceremony organized by Enapay's family. His mother, a venerable woman named Itzel, received Nayeli with maternal gentleness that transcended tribal barriers. Enapay's sisters offered her clean and appropriate clothes, plus products to care for her skin and hair, damaged by prolonged exposure to the elements. During the communal meal, Nayeli observed the complex family dynamics, noting how Enapay was respected not only as a warrior, but as a healer and spiritual counselor. His skillful hands in preparing medications and his gentle voice in calming a sick child revealed facets of his personality that explained why he had taken pity on her situation. She began to understand that she had been rescued not by an ordinary warrior, but by a man whose reputation for wisdom and compassion extended far beyond his martial abilities. During the following days, Nayeli was gradually integrated into the community's daily activities. Her skills in weaving and food preparation were quickly recognized and valued by the other women, who included her in their work circles without questions about her past. Enapay provided her with a small tent near the family area, ensuring her independence while maintaining her protection. He visited her regularly under the pretext of checking her health and adaptation, but Nayeli perceived that these encounters extended beyond medical needs. Their conversations, initially focused on practical matters, evolved into discussions about philosophy, traditional medicine, and the mysteries of nature. The intelligence and sensitivity she demonstrated during these exchanges clearly impressed Enapay, creating between them an intellectual connection that complemented the growing physical attraction. The evening wind of the plains seemed to carry between them unspoken promises of a shared future. Nayeli's transformation became evident to the entire community. Her posture regained lost dignity, her eyes shone again with life and purpose, and her active participation in community activities demonstrated successful integration. The tribe's children began seeking her out to hear stories from her tribe of origin, while older women appreciated her different artisan techniques. Enapay observed this transformation with deep satisfaction that transcended the personal pride of a successful healer. He began to see her not as a person in need of help, but as a complete and desirable woman whose presence enriched his own life. When their gazes met during community activities, an electric current coursed through the space between them, communicating feelings that had not yet been expressed in words. The possibility of true love, which she believed was lost forever, began to bloom in her heart like the wildflowers that dotted the plains after rain. The arrival of the rainy season brought a forced intimacy that accelerated the development of feelings between Nayeli and Enapay. During stormy days, when the entire tribe retreated to their tents, he found pretexts to visit her more frequently, bringing remedies for colds she didn't have, or offering to repair small damage caused by strong winds. Their conversations deepened, revealing mutual vulnerabilities that created stronger emotional bonds than simple physical attraction. Nayeli shared with him the deep pain of her previous rejection, while Enapay revealed his own struggles with family expectations that he find a suitable wife to continue his lineage. The sound of rain beating on the buffalo hide of her tent created a natural soundtrack for confessions that were whispered in the darkness of the stormy afternoon. The physical proximity during these intimate conversations generated palpable tension that both recognized but still didn't dare consummate. The first time they touched intentionally happened during a particularly violent storm that brought down part of Nayeli's tent. Enapay arrived drenched by rain to help with repairs, and when their hands met holding the same support pole, neither immediately pulled away. The moment extended beyond practical necessity, becoming a silent declaration of mutual desire. Their eyes met through the semi-darkness of the stormy afternoon, and Nayeli saw in them an intensity that made her heart race uncontrollably. When he gently touched her face with his rain-moistened fingers, she leaned against his hand, allowing herself to feel for the first time in years the transformative power of being desired by someone she also desired. The moment was interrupted by approaching voices, forcing them to separate, but both knew they had crossed an invisible frontier from which there would be no return. The electricity of the almost kiss remained between them like an unfulfilled promise that would make all subsequent encounters charged with expectation. In the days following the storm, the dynamic between them changed subtly. Enapay began demonstrating more evident protection, always positioning himself near her during community activities and offering to accompany her on walks to collect medicinal plants. Nayeli responded to these attentions with a receptiveness that didn't go unnoticed by the other tribal women, who began making discreet comments about the possibility of a future marriage. She perceived the speculative looks and whispers of people around her, but for the first time since her abandonment, these observations didn't bother her. Enapay's attention made her feel valuable again, not as a woman marked by infertility, but as a complete and desirable person. During her solitary walks across the plains, she allowed herself to dream about the possibility of a new life beside him, imagining future conversations and moments of intimacy yet to come. The infinite horizon of the plains came to represent not isolation anymore, but unlimited possibilities. The sexual tension between them reached a critical point during a medicinal herb-collecting expedition in an isolated area of the plains. Away from the community's gaze, they could interact with a freedom that the confines of the encampment didn't allow. Enapay taught her advanced techniques for identifying healing plants, his hands guiding hers in manipulating the most delicate species. The physical proximity necessary for these lessons created moments of intimate contact that made both tremble with an intensity that had little to do with the plains wind. When she was slightly injured by a thorn during collection, he treated the small cut with a delicacy that transformed simple medical care into a prolonged caress. His fingers lingered on her skin far beyond what was necessary to apply the remedy, while his eyes communicated a desire that words couldn't adequately express. The setting sun painted the plains with golden and reddish tones, creating a cinematic backdrop for a moment of pure emotional and physical connection. The return to the encampment that night was marked by a silence charged with meaning. Both knew they had dangerously approached the consummation of their feelings, and the tension between desire and social conventions created an almost tangible atmosphere around them. Enapay accompanied her to her tent with an exaggerated formality that contrasted with the intimacy they had shared during the day. When he said goodbye by briefly touching her hand, Nayeli felt every fiber of her being screaming for her to invite him to stay. The night stretched before her like an abyss of unexplored possibilities, while she remained awake, listening to the nocturnal sounds of the encampment and imagining Enapay doing the same in his own tent. The crescent moon that hid and reappeared among the clouds seemed to reflect the intermittent nature of her courage to make the next decision. She understood she faced a choice that would define not only her future, but her own identity, as a woman capable of loving and being loved again. The decision came unexpectedly during a crystal-clear morning, when Nayeli awoke with absolute certainty that she couldn't continue living in the emotional indefinition that had established itself between her and Enapay. The encampment gradually awakened around her, with the familiar sound of morning activities creating a comforting soundtrack for her revolutionary thoughts. She observed through her tent's opening the women preparing family breakfast, children running between tents, and men discussing the day's plans. Conscious that her personal happiness could no longer remain suspended due to fears and insecurities from the past, the aroma of wood fire and food being prepared mixed with the fresh morning air, creating an atmosphere of domestic normalcy that contrasted with the intensity of her interior decision. When she spotted Enapay walking toward the river for his morning ablutions, she knew that would be the moment to transform thoughts into actions. She followed him discreetly to the riverbank, where he performed his daily purification rituals in an area protected by willows that offered natural privacy. The crystalline water reflected the golden light of the rising sun, creating hypnotic patterns that seemed to dance to the rhythm of her accelerated heart. Enapay perceived her presence before she even spoke, his keen senses catching her approach through the almost imperceptible sounds of her steps on the wet grass. When he turned to face her, Nayeli saw in his eyes a mixture of surprise and recognition, as if he too had reached a similar decision during the sleepless night. The moment of silence that extended between them carried the weight of all unfinished conversations and all unconsummated touches that had accumulated in previous weeks. The morning breeze played with her loose hair, creating a natural frame for her determined face. Without uttering a word, she approached slowly, allowing each step to communicate her intention unequivocally. Enapay remained motionless, but his breathing became more intense as she decreased the distance between them. When they were finally close enough to feel each other's body heat, Nayeli extended her hand and delicately touched his chest, feeling under her palm the accelerated beats of his heart. The skin-to-skin contact generated an electric current that coursed through her entire body, awakening sensations she believed were dead forever. Enapay covered her hand with his, keeping it pressed against his chest, while his eyes communicated an intensity of feeling that transcended the limitations of verbal language. The sound of the river flowing gently in the background created a natural soundtrack for that moment of mutual recognition and emotional surrender. When he inclined his face toward hers, Nayeli understood there was no more return to the uncertainty that had dominated their lives in previous weeks. The kiss that followed was simultaneously gentle and urgent, carrying all the repressed passion that had grown between them since their first encounter on the banks of that distant river. Nayeli felt as if she were awakening from deep sleep, every nerve ending in her body reacting to Enapay's touch with a vivacity she hadn't experienced in years. His hands delicately traced her face and hair, as if he were memorizing every texture and contour through touch. The world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the bubble of intimacy created by their intertwined bodies and the perfect synchronization of their breathing. When they finally separated to breathe, both knew they had definitively crossed the line that separated them from friendship to something much deeper and more complex. Their reflection on the calm surface of the river seemed to bless that union with nature's silent approval. The hours that followed were spent in whispered conversations and exploratory caresses that revealed the depth of their mutual feelings. Enapay confessed that he had fallen in love with her from the first moment, but had fought against these feelings out of respect for her vulnerable situation and social conventions. Nayeli revealed how his presence had gradually healed not only her wounded body, but also her soul shattered by previous rejection. They openly discussed the challenges they would face as a couple, including possible objections from their families and social complications arising from her different tribal origin. However, the certainty of the love they felt for each other provided a solid foundation to face any obstacle that might arise. When they returned to the encampment that morning, walking side by side with evident intimacy, both knew their lives had been irreversibly transformed. The community would soon perceive the change in their dynamic, but they were prepared to face the consequences of their conscious choice to prioritize true love over conventional social expectations. News of the relationship between Nayeli and Enapay spread through the encampment with the characteristic speed of small communities, generating reactions that ranged from warm approval to respectful concern. Enapay's mother, Itzel, was among the first to express her support, recognizing in her son's positive transformation the evidence that Nayeli was a beneficial influence in his life. His sisters received the news with genuine enthusiasm, as they had witnessed Enapay's prolonged loneliness and desired to see him find the personal happiness he deserved. However, some tribal elders expressed discreet concerns about the implications of marriage to a woman marked by infertility, questioning whether such a union would be beneficial for the continuation of a respected healer's lineage. The weight of these divergent opinions created constant pressure on the couple, who needed to navigate carefully between public expression of their love and respect for community traditions. Mornings became precious moments of private intimacy, before the day's responsibilities forced them to assume their public roles with appropriate dignity. Preparations for the union ceremony began spontaneously, driven by Enapay's silent determination to officialize his commitment to Nayeli before the entire community. He discreetly consulted the elders about appropriate rituals, demonstrating his respect for traditions, even when some voices opposed his choice. The family women began preparing ceremonial adornments and traditional foods, transforming the wedding preparation into a community event that gradually won over even the most skeptical. Nayeli actively participated in these preparations, her artisan skills impressing the older women and demonstrating her ability to contribute significantly to the family and community. The process of creating her ceremonial dress became a ritual of acceptance, with each tribal woman contributing a specific element that symbolized her blessing for the union. Nights were dedicated to teaching traditional songs and dance steps she would need to know to participate adequately in the rituals. Nayeli's physical transformation during this period was remarkable to everyone who had known her since her arrival as a desperate refugee. Her skin regained healthy brightness, her hair grew long and silky, and her posture radiated the confidence of a loved and valued woman. Enapay couldn't hide the pride he felt seeing her interact with grace and intelligence in all social situations, confirming his conviction that he had chosen not only a companion, but a true life partner. During medicinal herb collecting expeditions, now conducted together, they developed an almost telepathic synchronization that impressed other community members. Their combined healing techniques began producing extraordinary results, with patients recovering more quickly under their coordinated care. Their reputation as a healing team began spreading to neighboring tribes, which sent emissaries requesting treatments for particularly difficult cases. The unexpected arrival of emissaries from Nayeli's original tribe brought a dramatic complication that no one had anticipated. Mato, her ex-husband, had discovered her location and sent representatives to claim her return, alleging that she was still technically his wife according to tribal laws. Tension in the encampment became palpable as both factions prepared for a negotiation that could determine Nayeli's fate. Enapay faced the situation with impressive calm, preparing to defend both legally and physically Nayeli's right to choose her own future. She herself surprised everyone, including herself, with the firmness of her response to the emissaries, publicly declaring that she had been abandoned and considered any previous bond completely dissolved. The strength of her declaration, supported by visible evidence of her recovery and happiness, impressed even her old tribe's representatives. The tribal council convened in special session to deliberate on the matter, while Nayeli and Enapay awaited the decision that would shape their entire future. The judgment occurred under the starry sky, with the entire community gathered in a circle to witness the resolution of that unprecedented conflict. The elders carefully heard arguments from both sides, weighing ancestral traditions against evidence of transformation and genuine happiness. Nayeli spoke with surprising eloquence about her journey from abandonment to redemption, describing how Enapay had not only saved her life, but restored her dignity as a woman and human being. Enapay complimented her testimony by offering to pay any compensation considered appropriate, demonstrating his respect for traditions while firmly defending his right to love. The decisive moment came when the principal elder rose to pronounce the verdict, his grave voice echoing across the silent plain under starlight. The decision was unanimous. Nayeli would be considered free to choose her own destiny, and any attempt to force her return would be seen as a violation of her personal autonomy. The explosion of relief and joy that followed the verdict echoed across the plains, carrying the promise of a future finally free from the shadows of the past. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days after the judgment, under a sky that seemed to have been painted especially for the occasion. The sunrise tinted the plains with golden and rose tones that reflected in Nayeli's ceremonial adornments, creating a visual spectacle that left the entire community impressed with her radiant beauty. Her traditional garments, carefully embroidered by the tribal women with patterns that told the story of her journey from abandonment to redemption, transformed her into an almost ethereal figure against the vast horizon of the Texas plains. Enapay, dressed in his finest warrior and healer garments, awaited her at the center of the ceremonial circle, with an expression of veneration that moved all present. The gentle plains wind carried the scent of wildflowers and sacred herbs burned during the ritual, creating an atmosphere that seemed blessed by nature's own spirits. Each step of Nayeli toward the man who had transformed her life was accompanied by ancestral chants that echoed through generations, connecting that present moment with the eternal wisdom of their ancestors. Vows were exchanged through symbolic gestures and traditional rituals that dispensed with formal words, but communicated deeper commitments than any verbal declaration could express. Enapay delicately tied around Nayeli's wrist a cord braided with threads from his own clothes, symbolizing the indissoluble union of their lives and destinies. She reciprocated by placing around his neck a necklace made with beads she had created during the weeks of preparation, each one representing a quality she admired in his character. The ceremony's most emotional moment came when they simultaneously drank from a single bowl of water from the river where they met, sealing their union with the element that had witnessed both her solitude and their miraculous encounter. The elders blessed the union with prayers that invoked prosperity, wisdom, and harmony, while the tribe's children scattered wildflower petals around the couple. The entire community sang celebration songs that had accompanied generations of marriages, their voices mixing to create a human symphony that rose toward the infinite sky. The months following the wedding proved to be a period of extraordinary happiness that surprised even their most optimistic expectations. Nayeli flourished in her role as healer's wife, developing innovative techniques that combined knowledge from her tribe of origin with her new family's traditions. Her ability to diagnose illnesses through careful observation of symptoms perfectly complemented Enapay's skills in herbal medicine treatments, creating a partnership that benefited the entire community. The expeditions they conducted together to collect healing plants became legendary among neighboring tribes, not only for the efficacy of their remedies, but also for the evident harmony between the couple. During these journeys across the plains, they constantly discovered new dimensions of their love, sharing contemplative silences and deep conversations that strengthened the emotional bonds between them. Nights under the starry sky were dedicated to physical and emotional intimacy that daily renewed their mutual commitment. Creating memories both knew they would treasure for life. The most surprising discovery came at the end of their first year of marriage, when Nayeli began presenting symptoms she initially attributed to temporary indisposition. The absence of her lunar cycles, combined with subtle changes in her body, gradually revealed a truth that seemed impossible according to all previous predictions. Enapay was the first to recognize the signs, his experience as a healer allowing him to identify a pregnancy when even she hadn't considered this possibility. The moment of confirmation was marked by an explosion of joy mixed with incredulity, followed by tears of gratitude that both shed upon recognizing the miracle happening in their lives. The woman, who had been marked as infertile and abandoned for her inability to bear children, was carrying in her womb proof that true love could transcend all apparent limitations. The news spread through the tribe with the speed of a plains fire, transforming Nayeli into a living symbol of the capacity for renewal and redemption that existed in the heart of the human condition. The birth of their daughter, during a spring morning when the plains exploded with wildflowers, marked the culmination of a journey that had begun in the cold waters of abandonment and ended in the golden light of complete fulfillment. The child, who received the name Ituha, meaning strong tree, was born healthy and vigorous, her arrival celebrated by the entire community as a gift from the ancestral spirits. Nayeli held her daughter against her chest for the first time while observing Enapay's radiant face, finally understanding that her period of suffering had been necessary to lead her to the place where she truly belonged. The infinite plains that extended beyond the birth tent seemed to whisper promises of a bright future for that child born from the purest love and the determination of two hearts that refused to accept defeat. When Ituha opened her eyes for the first time and looked directly at her mother, Nayeli saw reflected in those dark pupils the entire miracle of her own transformation. From a woman abandoned on the banks of a river to a loved and respected mother, whose story would become a legend, transmitted through generations as proof that even in the darkest moments of human existence, there is always the possibility of redemption through true love. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.